January 2011 began with a devastating reality for the top executives at Levi's. At the San Francisco headquarters, the atmosphere wasn't one of creativity or planning for new collections. It was the atmosphere of a funeral. They weren't looking at fashion designs. They were looking at balance sheets bordering on technical bankruptcy. The company that literally invented modern trousers, the brand that had dressed geniuses like Albert Einstein, visionaries like Steve Jobs, and millions of rebels for over 150 years, was one step away from being liquidated or chopped up for sale. How is it possible that the most used invention on the planet was killing its own creator? For over a century, Levi's wasn't an option, it was the standard. It was the unofficial uniform of humanity. If someone, in any corner of the world, was wearing denim, the odds of them being 501s were almost absolute. But entering the new millennium, something broke catastrophically. Levi's went from being the supreme symbol of rebellion and style to becoming the joke of the industry. Dad jeans. Those boring, stiff, shapeless pants you'd find piled up on a supermarket discount shelf. They lost their way. They lost their soul. And most gravely of all, they lost the respect of a generation that no longer wanted to look like their parents. How did a multi-billion-dollar empire go from dominating the planet to being practically invisible in shopping malls? And even more incredible, how are they managing today, in the era of algorithms and TikTok, to get kids who weren't even born in their prime to pay hundreds of euros for used models from the 80s? If you want to understand how a giant survives its own arrogance and self-destruction, stay until the end. This is the crashing fall and the fascinating rebirth of Levi's. To understand the magnitude of the disaster, we must first understand what we were losing. The story of Levi's doesn't start on a Paris runway, but amidst the dirt, sweat, and despair of the 1853 gold rush. Levi Strauss, a Bavarian Jewish immigrant, arrived in San Francisco with a shipment of fabric, looking to make a fortune selling supplies to miners. But the true practical genius was a tailor named Jacob Davis. Davis was sick of customers complaining about the same thing: pocket seams ripping under the weight of tools and gold. Davis's solution was so simple it seemed ridiculous: copper rivets to reinforce critical stress points. In 1873, Strauss and Davis patented the invention. Without knowing it, they had just created the XX, the precursor to the 501 and the first pair of blue jeans in history. For decades, Levi's wasn't fashion, it was technical gear. It was clothing for men who worked with their hands, for miners sleeping in caves, and cowboys spending months on a horse. The brand was built on a non-negotiable promise: they are so strong that not even two horses can tear them apart. That is where their iconic leather patch comes from. But in the 50s, a sociological phenomenon occurred that changed the history of consumption. Hollywood cinema took that work garment and charged it with eroticism and rebellion. James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, and Marlon Brando in The Wild One turned denim into a challenge to the establishment. Suddenly, if you wore Levi's, you were telling the world you didn't follow the rules. High schools in the US started banning jeans in classrooms, deeming them dangerous or immoral. And as we all know, there is no better marketing campaign for a young person than forbidding them something. In the 60s and 70s, Levi's were at Woodstock, at the protests against the Vietnam War, and at the fall of the Berlin Wall. The brand didn't sell fabric. It sold freedom. It sold the idea that your jeans told your personal story through every scratch and every stain. By the 90s, Levi's was simply untouchable. Their ads were award-winning cinematic short films, and sales were global. But while they celebrated in the boardrooms, a lethal virus began to grow within the organization: complacency. They felt so royal, so eternal, that they stopped looking sideways. And in the fashion world, the second you think you know it all is the second you start to die. In the early 2000s, The denim market suffered a brutal fragmentation, and Levi's got trapped in what analysts call the death zone. On one side, the arrival of fast fashion led by Zara, H&M, and Forever 21 changed the rules of the game. These stores could copy a runway trend and put it on the shelf in 15 days at laughable prices. They offered the skinny jeans young people craved for $20. On the other side, luxury denim emerged. Brands like 7 for All Mankind, Diesel, or True Religion started selling jeans for $300 or $400. These pants had complex embroidery, artisanal washes, and a fit that made anyone look like a rock star. Where was Levi's? It was in the middle. Too expensive to compete with fast fashion and too basic to compete with luxury. Levi's kept manufacturing the same straight, stiff cuts from 1947, convinced that the world would return to them out of pure nostalgia. But the world didn't return. For a teenager in 2005, walking into a Levi's store was like walking into their grandpa's closet. The brand became invisible. Sales nosedived year after year. From billing $7 billion in 1996, they dropped to barely $4 billion in a few years. And when they tried to react, they did so with a clumsiness that is studied in universities today as the perfect example of what not to do. In 2009, in a desperate attempt to regain relevance, they launched the Go Forth campaign. It was a tonal disaster. They wanted to be profound, using Walt Whitman poems and social struggle aesthetics. But they released these ads in the middle of one of history's worst economic crises, with millions of young people losing their jobs and homes. Seeing hot models running through fields while a voiceover spoke of revolution felt like an insult. The public rejected it immediately. They didn't need poetry. They needed pants that fit well and that they could afford. But the problem wasn't just marketing, it was the product. In a desperate attempt to save profit margins, the company made the most dangerous decision in its history: sacrificing quality. They closed their last factories in the US and outsourced all production to countries with cheap labor. The legendary heavy, resistant denim was replaced by thinner, cheaper blends. Seams started to fail. The dye didn't age the same. Collectors and purists screamed to the heavens. Levi's had broken its only sacred promise: durability. And then came the moral blow. A labor scandal in the Mariana Islands revealed brutal exploitation conditions in factories supplying the brand. Unpaid overtime, unsanitary conditions, and mistreatment. For a company that bragged about being the heart of American values, this was a stain almost impossible to clean. The brand was hollow inside and out. By 2011, Levi's was on life support. That was when the board of directors took an unusual decision. They named Chip Bergh as CEO. Bergh didn't come from the fashion world. He came from Procter & Gamble, where he was in charge of selling Gillette razors. Many thought it was the end. What did a guy from cleaning products know about cool and street culture? The first thing Bergh did upon arrival was a corporate culture audit. What he discovered was terrifying. He met with the top 60 executives of the company and asked them a simple question: how many of you are wearing Levi's right now? Only a fraction raised their hand. Most were wearing competitor brands or luxury labels. Bergh realized the company had lost respect for its own product. They had forgotten why they mattered. Bergh didn't try to invent a new urban fashion brand. He did something smarter. He decided to rebuild the legend from the foundation up. His strategy was based on 4 aggressive pillars. First, recover quality at any cost. They went back to working with denim from the legendary Cone Mills factory and restored construction standards. Second, fix the fit. They redesigned the 501 for the 21st century, creating stretch versions and tapered cuts that people actually wanted to wear. Third, expand beyond men. Levi's historically ignored women, who are the biggest spenders in fashion. Bergh invested millions in creating the perfect line of women's jeans, And the fourth pillar was the most brilliant: embrace the vintage market. Bergh realized that while the company suffered, there was a giant black market of old Levi's on eBay and thrift stores. Instead of competing with their past, Levi's started celebrating its history. They launched Levi's Authorized Vintage and Levi's Secondhand, becoming the first major clothing brand to sell its own used products, controlling the narrative of sustainability. But the resurrection wasn't just logistical, it was cultural. Levi's returned to music festivals, not as a boring sponsor, but by creating customization stations where young people could add patches, studs, and distress their jeans on the spot. They understood that in the Instagram era, everyone wants to feel unique. The culmination of this triumphant return arrived in 2024. Beyoncé, the absolute queen of pop culture, released her song Levi's Jeans. It wasn't a paid ad by the brand. It was an organic recognition of its status as a cultural icon. Demand skyrocketed so much that Levi's temporarily changed its name on social media to Levi's, with double I, winking at the artist's album. Suddenly, Generation Z, the same one that 10 years ago mocked dad pants, was forming virtual lines to get limited editions. Today, Levi's has achieved what very few companies manage: coming back from the dead without losing its identity. However, the road to 2025 and 2026 presents new challenges. Despite its media success, the global economy is slowing consumption. The company has announced it expects a slight drop in annual revenue, and they are making the strategic decision to sell secondary brands like Dockers to concentrate all their resources on what they do best: denim. The lesson of Levi's is a warning for any leader or entrepreneur. You can have 150 years of history. You can have dressed the most powerful men in the world. But if you stop listening to your customer, if you stop respecting the quality of what you sell, and if you become too arrogant to innovate, the market will destroy you without hesitation. Levi's wasn't saved by being an old brand. It was saved because it had the humility to admit it had become irrelevant and had the courage to change everything to return to its roots. And what do you think of this comeback? Do you believe Levi's current quality lives up to its legend? Or do you feel we are just paying for marketing and nostalgia? Are you someone who prefers buying new 501s? Or do you spend hours looking for a vintage pair from the 90s in a thrift shop? Leave us your opinion in the comments, because the debate on what makes a jean perfect is as old as the brand itself. If you liked this deep dive into the fall and rise of this denim empire, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us that, in the business world, the crown is always at stake. Are you ready to learn about the next corporate disaster that changed the world? Click on this video appearing on screen. I assure you the story of the next company will leave you speechless. See you in the next video.